Hey, it's you-man from KC95 here. Good evening and welcome to Toasted Tavern. Your host, Scott Tobin, and the man called Wags are ready to bring you the night in sports. So pull up a stool, grab a drink, and let's get toasted. Hey, it's you-man here from KC. For all your sports news, catch the Toasted Tavern with Scott Tobin and the man called Wags, weeknights at 9 p.m. You can follow Toasted Tavern on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Let's get toasted.
As we continue our tour of the Royals Hall of Fame, we've moved into stuff from the late 80s, early 90s, and something that caught my eye was
catches everyone.
It does. But growing up with him being one of my absolute heroes, we see the All-Star Game trophy from Anaheim, California in 1989 and the great Bo Jackson. So let's get into a little bit of Bo.
Yeah, Bo's such a great story, and how does the Heisman Trophy winner from 1986 all of a sudden become an outfielder for the Kansas City Royals? And it's really an interesting story because it's really a scouting story. And I talk about, scouting. How hard is it to scout Bo Jackson? Right? I mean, he's a super athletic ability. Probably, him and Jim Thorpe and Jesse Owens. He's like the great athletes of the 20th century. But it's really deeper than that because we had a scout named Kenny Gonzalez. And Kenny Gonzalez knew Bo way before anybody else knew Bo. We're talking back into like junior high when they're scouting, and they go down there and he sees this kid that's playing baseball, and he's like, we gotta keep track of this guy. But he always wanted to play football, and he had a single mother, and his mom wanted him to go to college, and he had an opportunity to go to college primarily for football because that was really sort of viewed as his number one sport. So he did go to college. He went to Auburn, obviously, and the Royals did not draft him out of high school, though Kenny had a good relationship with him, and did not draft him as a junior because Kenny knew that Bo had promised his mom that he was going to graduate from college. And so there was just no question that he was going to finish out his college career, especially back in that day. It might be different now, but coming out early was not as ubiquitous. It happened a lot, but it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. And so at that time, he wins the Heisman Trophy. He's the number one overall pick in the NFL draft. And then people are shying away in the baseball draft. It's like, well, you don't want to waste a draft pick. Why would we want to waste a draft pick on him? He's the number one pick in the NFL. He's not going to play baseball. But Kenny knew, is talking with Bo's mom, it's like, Bo really would really like the opportunity to maybe play baseball. So we waited until the third round and then jumped on it. And believe it or not, he signed, and forevermore, Bo Jackson was So had it not been for Ken Gonzalez, Bo Jackson might have never played professional baseball. So it's really an interesting scouting story to be able to know that. And know that it was a little bit deeper than the idea that the Royals drafted the Heisman Trophy winner. The Royals were actually sort of drafting the kid Kenny Gonzalez saw in junior high. That was really the kid that they were drafting. But they waited out their time to be able to draft him. And they were able to sign him. Of course, then Bo, a year into his major league career, decided that he was going to take up a hobby, which was playing in the NFL. Which is kind of a dangerous hobby, as we found out, and it sort of truncated both his. He did end up playing baseball again after on an artificial hip, which tells you all you need to know about the athletic ability of Bo Jackson. He played baseball on an artificial hip, but he was never the player again. When he played with the White Sox a little bit later, and then he finished up with the Angels on that artificial hip, he was never the player again that he was in his time with the Royals. An amazing human story nonetheless, that the fact that he even played after that. But yeah, he's a great part of Royals history, and human highlight reel, superhero come to life, and he's given us there's the throw in Seattle, there's the climbing up the wall in Baltimore, there's the home run in Anaheim. I mean, there's a lot of those Bo moments, and nobody can give you the moment like Bo Jackson did. We just wish we would have had more.
Absolutely. That would have been fun to see. And like you said, that 89 All-Star game was his coming out party, I think, for the country. Is, he hits the home run with President Reagan on the broadcast with Vin Scully. And I think everybody realized at that moment that he was going to be a superstar. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see what he could have become.
One of the fun things about that All-Star game is if you really look at if you go back and look at the video, so you got to put your mind in, it's an All-Star game. So everybody there is really good. And if you watch the other players that are there, it's like they're like in awe of they're like little kids. It's like, holy cow, look at this guy. And it was sort of his coming out party. The Bo Knows campaign sort of springs out of this game. And he goes from being sort of, very well known, this sort of football player playing baseball, to just superstardom. Right after that, and it doesn't last a whole lot longer after that, because it was January 1991 when he gets the hip injury in the playoff game playing for the Raiders against the Bengals. So it was like a shooting star across the sky. The one thing about from a Kansas City perspective, so when Bo was in Kansas City, it was like unconditional love, right? We loved the guy, and he did all these amazing things, and he was so thrilling to watch. And then not only when he decided to take up his hobby, which was frustrating to people in Kansas City because we wanted him to play baseball, but he not only decided he was going to play football, he decided he was going to play football for the Raiders, which, if you know anything about Kansas City, that's not cool. And so the love at times during the year of Bo's playing time was conditional. We didn't so much love him during the football season because he was playing for the Raiders.
Yeah, I bet those were some interesting games when he came to Arrowhead and played, how the fans reacted.
They were, and he had teammates from his baseball down on the field, and they were there to see their teammate play baseball. But like George Brett, who would be at those games, would always try to make sure that everybody knew, I'm not rooting for them. I'm just here to watch my teammate play in his hobby, like going to his wood shop, or whatever. It's like, but Bo's an amazing character, that's for sure, and still is to this day. So, and we're always excited when he comes around. He's made appearances at fantasy camp and back here at the ballpark, and when especially people of a certain age, when just the sight of Bo Jackson is an amazing thing, because it takes you right back to those moments, and you look at him, it's like that's a superhero come to life.
And one of the ones I'm looking at is the 2014 collection. That 2014 team was an awfully exciting team, and then the end of their season, and then of course their wild card run to get into the playoffs.
The 2014 team is a very special team in Kansas City history. Sometimes they get overshadowed by the 15 team, because the 15 team would go on and win the World Series. So we didn't know that at the time, right? So sometimes they get a little lost in the shuffle after 15. I always say the same thing about the 1980 team. The 1980 team is the one that's deep in my heart. I was 12 years old in 1980, so that's my team. I share all the other teams with everybody else, but that's my team. And of course, they did not win the World Series, so my 12-year-old me still crushed by that. But the 85 team, of course, would go on and win the World Series and gets a lot more focused than the 80 team. Well, the same sort of thing comes with the 14 and 15 team. But the 14 team is so important because it broke a long string of us not being in the playoffs, 29 years without being postseason baseball. And so the clinching up in Chicago, a huge moment that I am so happy that I was fortunate enough to be there. And then, usually when you make it to the World Series and it doesn't turn out the way you want it to, the moment that you revert back to is winning the pennant. The pennant's, another big, huge goal and a huge accomplishment to win a pennant in the National League or American League. Sometimes that gets short shrift. Winning the pennant is like unbelievable. And but the 14 team, it's interesting is it doesn't go back to winning the pennant. the moment is, most people don't even remember Game 4. We swept the Orioles in that. Most people don't even remember Game 4. It was here. It was in the afternoon. We scored 2 runs in the first inning and won that game. And we scored 2 runs in the first inning without the ball leaving the infield. And nobody remembers any of that. They remember we won, but they don't really remember any details. But what they do remember is September 30th, which was this game over here, which is the wild card game, which is the craziest game. And if I ever see a game that is more exhilarating in my entire life, I will be thrilled, because it's hard to imagine a game that would be more sort of magical than the 2014 wild card game, because we came from behind and all sorts of crazy things. If you've been, you know, when events like that are over and you look back at them and you feel like they were preordained, well, of course that was going to happen. But while it was going on, it wasn't going to happen that way. And it felt like maybe midway through that game, or even really late into that game, into the 9th inning, it was like, oh, we're going to be in the post. It's great we're in the postseason, but it's going to last like 3 hours and we're going to be right back out of it. But it didn't work that way, because that team never gave up. They ended up winning that game in just wild fashion. The wild card game is aptly named in this case. And it serves really as a launching point for what would come, because we came really close to losing that game. And then all of a sudden from that game, we won 7 more consecutive playoff games. And all of a sudden, it wasn't but like 10 or 12 days later, we're in the World Series. And that was an exciting World Series against the Giants, and we came up a little short. And so everything sort of reverts back to the wild card game. So most everything in 2014 is the memory of the wild card game, and so it shall ever be here in Kansas City, because it was an unbelievable night. And it's sort of a 2-chapter story. 14 and 15 sort of go together, and this is like the opening chapter of what would become a World Series championship the next year.
That 2014 game, that wild card game, like you said, was just unbelievable. I remember watching it in St. Louis and being worn out after that game, because it was, like you said, you're like, oh man, they're gonna be one and done, and then just out of nowhere they came back and rained like crazy, and that was fun. And in St. Louis, we were really hoping, because the Cardinals were pushing. We thought there for a while we might get that 70 series rematch, but that was a lot of fun to watch those teams for sure.
They were an interesting group. They had a real signature brand of baseball, really different in this era, because we always talk about the 3 true outcomes and the home runs. That team finished last in the league in home runs. Their mantra was put the ball in play, keep the line moving, is what they always used to tell each other. That was sort of their catchphrase, and they did, and it sort of came through in 14 as well. So there was a game against Houston in 14 that was very much like the wild card game, when we were had our backs up against the wall, and that team responded each and every time, both in 14 and 15. It was a real special time in Kansas City.
And I think you talked about those teams playing a different kind of baseball. I think St. Louis fans really loved those Royals teams too, because it brought us back, because it made us think of something that Kansas City fans remember too, in Whitey Bowl. And they played very much like that style of baseball.
It was very similar. It was a very athletic team, a team that would want to put the ball in play, put the pressure on the defense, would steal, very good base runners. Not always the same thing. So we had guys that could steal, but we also had very good base runners. And they were just so much fun to watch. They were so much fun to watch. And it just extenuated all the way through both playoff time. If you go back and watch those games, we relied on the home run a little bit, especially in 14 in the DS against the Angels and the CS against the Orioles. There were some key home runs. But like in the World Series against the Mets, we only had 2 home runs in that World Series. They were both in Game 1, and one of them was inside the ballpark.
I remember that, yeah.
And it's interesting that Alcides Escobar, who hit the inside the ballpark home run to start the game, first batter for the Royals in the bottom of the first. He was also the person that scored the winning run in extra innings. So that's always sort of an interesting dynamic. He both started and ended that game when he touched home plate. Greats in baseball history, Walter Johnson, who was born in Humboldt, Kansas. So we sort of have a local tie to him. He has a long inscription on it, which I find is, I should have memorized it, but I don't know exactly what it says. So Johnson takes it back to the White House the next day. The senators sort of had visited the White House the next day, and the president, doesn't just sign it. He writes this whole, 3-sentence thing. If you've ever tried to write on a baseball, that's not easy.
Right.
And I can't really read it, but it's pretty straight lines and everything. So William Howard Taft had at least somewhat decent penmanship.
Our next stop, we're in front of this amazing monument to George Brett. Let's talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so this is to represent all 3,154 of George Brett's hits. And the 3,000th hit, bat and ball, is encased inside of it. So that is the bat he was using and the ball that he hit to join the 3,000 hit club. You can tell that George used a lot of pine tar. A lot of people mistake this for the pine tar bat, and I always tell them they'd be a little bit disappointed in the pine tar bat, which has been here on occasion. It is in Cooperstown, but the pine tar bat has no pine tar on it because the pine tar got cleaned off the bat, and George actually used it the next weekend. And it's Gaylord Perry, another Hall of Famer who was finishing out his career with us in a very short stay with us at the end of the '83 season. And George got the bat back in Cleveland the following weekend. The Pine Tar game happened on a Sunday, and we came home, but then we were in Cleveland the following weekend. And George got the bat back, and he used it. And Gaylord Perry told him, George, you shouldn't be using that bat. It's like that caper is going down in baseball history, and you're going to wish you had the bat and that it wasn't broken. So George stopped using it, and it's pretty pristine, but it doesn't really have any pine tar in it. It does have a red mark around where the 18-inch line is, and then George, it does say in George's handwriting on the barrel of the bat, it says, "This is the Pine Tar bat, 8/24/83," which for me is kind of fun to look at because I recognize George's handwriting. So.
And that's one of those iconic moments, from baseball in the '80s. You always see the video of George storming out of the dugout after that goal.
Let's just say he was very displeased, and of course he was right too.
Right.
As we turn out and find out, the umpires had a misapplication of a guideline, not a rule, and a couple of days later, they would reverse the call and they would have to resume the game, which they did in August. About 4 weeks later, we had to go and play a half inning of baseball at the end of our road trip in Baltimore. 4 up, 4 down. Hal McRae made the last out in the top of the ninth, and we got them 1, 2, 3 in the bottom of the ninth, and finally got the win. Delayed by about almost a month.
And as we move on in the Royals Hall of Fame, we're here in front of the Royals 2 World Series trophies, which we can talk proudly about. This one we'll pretend like it's not.
I know that one's painful. I've never been to Philly, so I know if I went to Philly or now San Francisco, I was there. But those World Series trophies would pain me. But this is the '85 trophy, which the Cardinals have an interesting designation in the fact that the Cardinals have the first World Series trophy, because prior to '67 there was no such thing as a World Series trophy. So you guys have the very first one, and this one, of course, being a very important one to us. Technically, this was the first time it was called that it actually had a name. It is technically not called the World Series trophy. It had no name forever. And then '85 was the first year it actually had an official name, which it still has now, which is called the Commissioner's Trophy, although nobody actually calls it that. And but she's one of our prized possessions, obviously. And I know it's painful for Cardinal. When I'm in a joking mood, or if somebody gets a little too jocular with me, it's like, well, I know where the World Series trophy is, and it's still there, and she's there. But it was really, when you really think back upon it, those who lived through the experience of the two teams playing against each other, it was really special. I always like to point out, because the Royals, it was sort of a culmination of a bunch of Royals teams that had made the playoffs and hadn't been able to win the World Series. So I think sometimes our friends in St. Louis get the feeling that we celebrate the 85 World Series because we beat the Cardinals. I always tell we could have beat the Neptune Stars to beat the World Series. It was winning the World Series that was special. It was the first time. We had been once before and lost in heartbreaking fashion, and we finally had the trophy and had won it. So it was important in that particular way. Now, I'm not going to lie. It was the fact that it was against St. Louis. Did that add something to it? Sure, it did. But we could have played. We could have played anyway. I mean, people love. We love the 15 story just as much, and we played the Mets, and we don't have any rub with the Mets. But we have that trophy that's right next to this one, and it's still very special. The one thing I always point about that, so we have two different designs, as you guys do as well, and fortuitous that we both have both styles, because from 67 until 99 the trophy was that Balfour style, and then in the year 2000 it changed to this Tiffany style. So we did finally get one of these, and one of my favorite things about the 2015 World Series is a lot of first game things, because it was the first World Series ever between two expansion teams, which seems impossible. The idea, it had been more than half a century into the expansion era, and no two expansion teams had played each other in the World Series until 2015. And not only that, it was the first National League expansion team to make a World Series was the Mets. The first American League team to make a World Series was the Royals. The National League expansion team that had played in the World Series the most time was the Mets. The American League team that had played in the most World Series was the Royals. So it made sense that it was going to finally be these two teams. And it was. And Game 1 fell on October 27th, which was exactly 30 years to the day from the Royals winning the first World Series. And it was exactly 29 years to the day from when the Mets had beaten the Red Sox to win the World Series. And also in the Mets, it was the Mets' 5th World Series, and it was our 4th. Neither team had ever won Game 1 in any of their World Series appearances. And that game it's been surpassed now. But at the time, it was the longest game in World Series history, which means neither team had ever won a Game 1, and they were taking forever to find out who was going to finally win a Game 1. And fortunately enough, it was us, because it really spurred us to be able to go and go ahead and win that World Series. Highlighted mostly by Alex Gordon's game-tying home run in the 9th inning, which was really the key to the whole thing. And then we would go on and win it in 14. Game 1. We won game 5 and 12. We kept going extra. We were very good in extra innings. If it went extra innings, we were going to win.
That was like we talked about earlier, such a good group, because those guys never quit. Those 14 and 15 teams, you had Gordon, like you talked about, Moustakas and Hosmer and Kane, and that was just a great group of players.
The 15 team, so I lived through the 1980 World Series as a 12-year-old, and we had leads in every single one of those games, and leads late, except for Game 6, and leads late. So I always tell people, Mets fans, it's like I can commiserate with you, because the Mets had leads and late in Games 1, Game 2 they did, but they had in Game 1, and Game 4, and Game 5, they had leads late, and they weren't able to hold on to that. They would win the World Series in Game 5 in New York. Very special. My relationship with New York City will never be the same, and it will always be a special place for me, because that's where we won the World Series.
And we were going back and forth about that 85 team. Something else that a lot of people don't realize is all the connections between the Cardinals and Royals with the rosters, because you had White, you had Gerald Porter with the Cardinals.
That's right.
You had Lonnie Smith, who got traded to Kansas City in 85, and you had Dane Orch, who had a big hit in that Game 6.
So Lonnie was a key part of that, because he came to us early in that season in a trade with the Cardinals for John Morris, I don't remember. And it was really important, because he sort of served as a catalyst for us on offense, and played well, although he was always an adventure on defense, skates, but very important player. And of course, Dane Orch has the key hit, right? So He has the hit in Game 6 that drives in the 2 runs and sends it to Game 7. And he was so spectacular for the Cardinals. A lot of people don't remember how well he played in the '82 World Series. Darryl was the MVP, but Dane had played really well in that World Series. And so yeah, there are definitely some connections inside there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that really drove a knife into people with Dane Orge got that hit, because everybody remembered how huge he was in '82. And you talked about Lonnie and his defense. Whitey's famous quote when he made that trade was, "If there was a DH in the National League, Lonnie would have died a Cardinal." But just couldn't have skates in the outfield
you couldn't
anymore.
have skates in the outfield. And we had some very good. So we had a guy by the name of Lynn Jones, who nobody really remembers. But Lynn Jones was a very good defensive outfielder, and he would take over for Lonnie a lot. If you see like the last out of Game 3 in St. Louis in left field is not Lonnie Smith. It's Lynn Jones that's out there, because Dick Hauser had put what he called his spare parts. He said, I have the best spare parts, which included Dane Orge and included Lynn Jones and John Woff and a couple other guys that were all very key to that team winning.
It's been a great show, Curt Nelson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
It's been fun talking on and off camera today, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
I appreciate it, and I look forward to. I haven't seen a game at Busch Stadium in several years, so hopefully next year I'll make it over for the eastern side of the I-70 series.
Yeah, you get to St. Louis, let us know. We'll get together.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks a lot, Curt.
All right.
Hey, it's you-man here from Casey. For all your sports news, catch the Toasted Tavern with Scott Tobin and the man called Wags, weeknights at 9 p.m. You can follow Toasted Tavern on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Let's get toasted.